could please do it outside. And the last session is on gaming, which you've heard a lot of discussion about today. Dagley Higley has been with UBS Investment, and just, I guess, last week to start a venture fund?
That is
okay.
correct.
Right. So he'll introduce the speakers. Thank you.
Right. Thanks. It's nice to know we can go for a couple hours, so that should be good for us here. What we're going to talk about, obviously, is games and community, and we'll go through this. I think what I'd like to do, outside of, I'll give you a little bit of my background, and have the panelists give some of their background, sense of from the audience, because as we're going through the Q&A, we can kind of try to direct things one direction or another. Who are, just in the audience, as far as like who are entrepreneurs? Maybe a show of hands. Who's in the media industry? Who are investors? Okay, there's a good chunk of no hands, but I don't know what other category. Employed? Right here, good, okay.
They're gamers.
Yeah. Oh, and gamers. There we go.
There we are.
All right. Just quickly on my background, it was mentioned as of Monday, I'm formally a managing director and global head of digital media at UBS. We're in the process of raising an LA-based venture fund, and I can give you my thoughts around that this is the right time to do it, but maybe years. And I'm also doing some advisory work with some ongoing clients, and part of it is I've been doing this for a long time, and I have a lot of relationships, and it's important to kind of stay in the flow. I started out as a securities lawyer. I moved into investment banking and ran the digital media group for 8 years. I've done about 70 transactions in my career, about $20 billion in value. Clients have been Activision, Acclaim, Atari, Eidos, Foundation 9, Infogram, Lionhead, Midway Games, and THQ. On the internet media side, it would be About.com, Aquantive, CNET, Elevation Partners. We help them with the Forbes deal. eMusic, Google, Hoover, IGN, MapQuest, Rent.com, Turbine. And then wireless was jammed at iPhone, Kongjong, and Smith Micro. So that's a little bit of my background. I'm also a proud member of the board of directors of Gamecock Media. I encourage you to check out the site. It's the old God Games guys, and they're relaunching it, and I think they're going to have a lot of fun and hopefully be successful in what they're doing. Why don't I turn it over to the panelists just to have you guys give just a brief intro of yourself and your company as well.
I'm Keith Halper, the CEO of Kuma Games. Kuma Games is building an analog for television with the game industry. These are free, episodic, ad-supported, high-end video games similar to what you would see on a console game. My background, I'm a Viacom guy. I produced many branded games, including Star Trek, Tom Clancy, Jerry Seinfeld, and others, and also ran or helped run a community site called CyberSites, which was similar to many of the things that became very successful after us.
My name is Darren Herman. I'm the co-founder of IJ Worldwide, and I currently handle all company strategy. IJ has built an aggregated video game network ranging from console games, PC games, and mobile games. We leverage that for brand advertisers and agencies alike. My background is in entrepreneurship and technology and media.
My name is Shane Satterfield. I work at MTV Networks as the editor-in-chief of GameTrailers.com, the world's first and only video-only site for video games. My background is definitely in journalism. Worked at GameSpot.com for several years before becoming editorial director at G4, which used to be a games-only network.
My name is Mike Cassidy. I'm the CEO of Xfire. Xfire is an instant messenger for PC video gamers. We have about 6.5 million registered users. It helps gamers play online with their friends. It's a very sticky application. Gamers typically run Xfire 96 hours a month. Every day there's about 300 million user minutes of people running Xfire. We're now part of MTV. They bought us last year. They're focusing on the male demographic. My background, this is the third company I've been CEO and co-founder of. The last one was a search engine, and the one before that was computer telephony.
Hi, my name is Yoav Tzruya. I'm with Accent Technologies. We're not a consumer brand, but we power some of very non-consumer brands like Turner Broadcasting, GameTap, Comcast Games on Demand, Verizon's Games on Demand, and a bunch of other Tier 1 service providers and media companies across the world. As a company, we work in 3 different areas. One of them is digital distribution, where essentially we put together video gaming services, high-end video gaming services for broadband service provider, media companies, and large portals. The second area that we operate in is in-game advertising. And the third area that we operate in is social networks around video games.
Great. Okay, well, why don't we get into this? I think the start, I mean, the name is Games and Community. You know, I always think games have kind of gotten a bum rap as kind of an antisocial environment. I mean, I remember growing up, I mean, the arcades were actually an incredibly social area where people would go and interact and watch each other play games. You know, whether it's people playing Madden football as a group or even what's going on with the, you know, Xbox Live. But I wanted to turn it over to the panelists and maybe get your views on how you define community within gaming.
So I would say that gaming as a whole is, you know, if you look back at the historic origins of gaming, it's a social activity. And people are there to either compete and brag about their achievement or to collaborate with their partners in the game in order to achieve a common result. And unfortunately, you know, at the 80s and the 90s, video gaming was never a collaborative experience, or rarely a collaborative experience because of technology limitations. And really, if you think today about what community gaming applications means, it's everything. It's everything from playing a multiplayer game, such as, you know, what Mike's Xfire lobby services enable. It goes through sharing your experience and creating UGC walkthroughs and hints and how do you achieve a certain result in a game. And it goes through also even creating video games, which today can or start to be a community effort where we have some open source game, and we have even companies like Microsoft launching things like XNA Studio Express, which allows essentially end users to create video games. So there are a lot of different aspects to what does a community around video games actually means.
Okay. Anything to add, or otherwise move on?
Yeah, just seconding that. 9 out of the top 10 PC games being played are multiplayer games. You know, World of Warcraft, it's a 40-person team to do one of the big raids. You know, Battlefield and Call of Duty and Counter-Strike are all sort of team-based games. 80% of the time for Xfire users, they're playing online with friends. So I think it is a stereotype that it's a solitary activity. It's very much a social activity.
The most successful gaming communities are the ones that manage to humanize the digital avatar. Just last week, Sony showed a new product for the PlayStation 3 called Home, which is basically a 3D virtual world where you can create your own avatar. It can look like you, it can look like somebody else. But you basically venture throughout this 3D world. You have your own apartment. People can come over, hang out in your apartment, watch TV, join to play games. So I think sort of the push is towards creating this virtual world where people can interact and at the same time connect to play games together.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just, one data point that we had from our own product, we recently completed a deal with the History Channel, and we had a lot of first-time gamers coming in who had never played before. And those first-time gamers would typically come in and play single player, and they were intimidated by some of the social aspects and playing with other people. We are now 2 months after that deal, and so the people who have stayed with us have now really migrated almost entirely into multiplayer. We're seeing 20-to-1 plays multiplayer to single player from those original games, so that seems to be the carrot.
I would just like to add to that. I mean, certainly we see that multiplayer, and because of some indoctrination to a certain extent that the gaming community has gone through, it's really one of the most common aspects of community in games. However, you know, even in relatively simple types of environments where people just go to a website to download, as long as they have the ability to share their experience from games, we see them stick around for tens of hours, right? So we see, for example, on our services, the service that we have up and running with Verizon, people spend in excess of 35 hours a month on games that are not multiplayer games. All that they can do is essentially post, their impression of the game and put it up on forums and such. This is the most simplistic way of sharing your experience, and they still stick around for 35 hours a month.
Okay, and I think there are also companies or games like RuneScape, Club Penguin, Habbo Hotel, Adventure Quest. I think we look at Second Life, although they don't like to say they're a game. There's certainly social elements, strong social elements to each of those, and certainly mass appeal, and all of them seem to be having very good success and certainly good traffic. One of the things that I found, at least in talking with a lot of the folks there, is there really is an interaction on those games, and it's active. There's an active collaboration between the users and the companies that run the game as far as trying to continue to refresh content and really kind of move the storylines in directions that the users want. Why don't we talk a little bit, as we're talking about this, as far as the revenue models, when we do talk about community and we do talk about traffic, it leads obviously to the next thing, which is, how do you make these sustainable? And I think clearly it's there needs to be some sort of revenue model around there. The ones that we've seen obviously started with subscriptions. You've seen some micropayments in the ad-supported model, but I'd love to get the panel's views on this. Maybe starting with you, Mike, just on the revenue models with that.
So we're pure advertising, and I think it's a great market these days for advertising to gamers. Some of the big advertisers we've seen on our service are Stride Gum, Dodge, Pepsi, Unilever. A lot of them are trying to reach the sort of the young male demographic. They realize a shift in consumption of media, in some ways away from TV and more to games. And I think there's $50 billion a year spent annually now in TV advertising, and far, far less in the gaming arena. So if you believe in an efficient market, there's certainly going to be some shifting of ad dollars over.
Again, in the ad space as well, same as Mike over at Xfire, IGA is witnessing that as well. I mean, that's what our company's based on, is in-game advertising. So as game has become much more community-based, a lot more people are playing. Nielsen comes out with a report saying the 18 to 34-year-old males are not watching TV. A large portion of them are playing games. So that's helped advertising dollars come in. One thing that we've found at IGA is that games exist at your console or on your PC, but experience as well. And gaming sort of transcend the time that you're actually playing the game, but all of your experiences around, such as the trailers, the downloads, the cheat codes that are on a website, the unlockables, the magazines. And we found some good traction in the market where we can sort of bundle in-game advertising with sort of the experience of the video game as well.
I know for us it's been difficult to monetize community directly. Banner ads, forums, there's a really low click-through rate for those. Advertisers sort of shy away from that. So what we had to do is find sort of alternate ways to gain money and things like that from our community. And what we found is we have a user movie interface where people can submit their own user movies. And first when we did it, it's great. We can't really run pre-rolls before the user movies. But what we found is that the game publishers have come to us and asked us to do user movie contests based upon their games. So they come to us with a game. They're like, this is our game. We have an idea for a user movie contest. We sort of set it up on the site, run banner ads across MTV networks. We get all the submissions, and then we sort of have a voting process with our community to decide who wins. Now, how that works for us is we're sponsored by these publishers to use these user movie contests. So while we're not getting a lot of revenue from the banner ads in our forums or pre-rolls from the actual user movies, we can monetize it in other ways by getting the publishers to actually sponsor these user movie contests.
I think that one thing to understand about the video gaming industry is that it's really a very non-sophisticated industry in terms of business models today. I mean, a publisher that publishes a game and puts it out in retail in Walmart or Best Buy or EB or wherever, actually, there's a single release window of distributing that game in retail. That release window typically lasts between 14 and 16 weeks. If the game doesn't perform that well, your $15 to $20 million of investment in a high-end game went down the drains. So the video gaming market is essentially, despite the fact that as a first release window, it's a $12 billion market in 2006, which is larger than the box office revenues in the US last year, which were at around the $9 billion market. It's non-sophisticated, and the video gaming market is looking for additional business models, and really, in 2006 and also in 2007 is still in some sort of an experimental mode to try and find what business model will prevail. So we hear about in-game advertising, which is still to a certain extent a nascent industry. We also hear about digital distribution. We see companies like Turner and CBS moving into that space. We've had Comcast and Verizon in that space for a while. We're seeing episodical gaming. Turner has put together a series of episodical gaming around Sam & Max brand. So we're seeing a lot of experience in the market. The whole idea is to try and expand this single release window that currently exists for video games to create some kind of a recurring revenue models for video games to a certain extent, in a similar way to how massively multiplayer games have been able to create a subscription model around collaborative forms of gaming. We also saw in other types of games item-based trading. So we're seeing people selling on the internet their swords or their magical items or their clothes or their designs online. This is by over $1 billion industry in 2006. So we're really seeing a lot of different business models that come to fruition. From our perspective, from Extent's perspective, it's still about premium. This is where most of our customers do today. So this is where Turner is, this is where Comcast and Verizon is. And we also truly believe in in-game advertising, but we see it more or less as a demand generation tool rather than a way to generate significant revenues in the next couple of years.
At the same time, I think it's a slippery slope to walk down with episodic content. What you're seeing now with a lot of gamers is they're looking at episodic content is something that should have been put in the game in the first place. So now gamers are really paranoid that the publishers are actually cutting content out of their games that they would have originally put in it because they can release it a couple months after the game's release and milk another $10 out of their game. So gamers are really smart, they're very tech savvy, and I think publishers need to be really careful about how they sort of handle this, otherwise there could be a huge backlash from the players.
I absolutely agree with you on that, but on the episodical gaming, I think that you represent the general notion in the market, but I think it's some sort of a vocal minority point of view, because we actually did a test. We took we have the capability to measure the use of certain features, levels, and inside the game. We did a test with some of the popular games. I just put it out in the market to see, which features people use. How many hours do they really play a popular game? So the numbers were really, they play about between 15 to 20 hours, and these are hardcore gamers, right, per game. And they really don't reach, in a lot of games, the number of users, percentage-wise, that reach the advanced stages of the game is not that high, and yet they pay the 50 or 60 bucks for the game, and at the same time, publisher might have saved a lot of money developing the features that people actually don't use and never reach in the game. So episodical gaming is a way, I think, more for the publisher to reduce the risk in investing upfront in the features and in the elements of the game that in a lot of cases people won't use, and people that are hooked up on the game will go and spend more money actually than they would have spent in the initial 50 bucks to purchase additional episode and additional items or whatever it is, levels, racetracks, whatever it is, that because they want to play the game, not because the publisher forced them to pay 50 bucks for the game.
Yeah, and I think there's no question that I know just from all the work we've done with the publishers, they've really been extremely concerned, with the cost of development going up, but the price points are not doubling. I mean, it's 20 to 30 million plus to get out a AAA title, and how do you do that? What it means is you got to sell more units. It increases associated to development. I would actually argue it's also stifled some innovation, that people are less likely to take chances, so maybe new models around that. So I think that's actually a good transition to actually talk a little bit about the console side of the business. I remember when Microsoft launched, and I was talking with Brian Lee about this, I was amazed. They were gearing up for the Xbox launch, and the Xbox Live division was the largest division within the Xbox unit, and it was clear that it was a real focus. And it kind of made sense. They had MSN, they had the backbone, they had the infrastructure to do this, and I think they looked at it and said, this is a real way for us to differentiate ourselves if we can do it. And I think, you know, Xbox Live on the original Xbox platform was really kind of a proving model, and it really kind of launched on Xbox 360. What do you guys think? Was that the right strategy for Microsoft? Maybe, well, I'll take it to one of you guys. We'll go to another question. Whoever.
Well, I think sort of the success of Xbox Live has been a little bit overblown. While it did sort of differentiate the Xbox in the last generation of consoles, at the same time, if you actually look at the numbers, there were more people playing the PlayStation 2 online than there were the Xbox because it was completely free. And while it didn't have the same features, the matchmaking that you got with Xbox Live, a lot of people were willing to overlook that to not have to pay the $50 a month just to play.
Sure.
So, you know, while I think it's sort of a Microsoft as a player in the console industry, I don't think it's a differentiator that obviously they didn't win last generation, and I don't think it's going to help them win this generation either. It's going to come down to what games they have for their system.
I agree with Shane on that observation. However, I think that when Microsoft looks at Xbox Live, I don't look at Xbox Live, I look at Live. And Live is not just an Xbox experience, it's a set of, I would say, user-oriented features, community, messaging, communications, digital distribution of content, not just games, by the way, also movies and music and such, that will be a theme across their different devices and across their different operating system. It's not just an Xbox Live, it's Windows Live, and next thing there will be a handheld live environment, and they want to tie all of that together, niche after niche in the market, and essentially they look at Xbox Live as yet another group of users that we can pull into this live environment and create that overall community which is larger than just Xbox Live as a standalone. So I think that certainly on as a gaming, Xbox Live is a nice service and it has nice features. It's not the biggest in terms of number of users. I think that even Xfire has more users than Xbox Live overall. But I think that from a community perspective, it's not Xbox Live. It's Microsoft Live and the various aspect of it. It's not the standalone.
Do you want to?
I'd love to, but I have a few
Yeah,
questions.
no, that's fine.
Okay, Shane,
Take it
buddy.
away.
We're brothers, sister companies. I think actually Microsoft nailed it with Xbox Live. I think they're right on the right track. This guy, Ralph Rivera from AOL, some people might know, had this story he used to tell. Where, he used to go do pickup basketball games in New York streets, and he'd say if he went and he was the only one there, he'd shoot baskets for 15 minutes and he'd go home. If he went and there were some people he didn't know there, he'd shoot around for an hour. Go home. If he went and his friends were there, he would play all day. And I think that's the way it is with games, online multiplayer games. With Xbox Live, and I'm not a fan of Microsoft, people, not necessarily a fan of Microsoft, but I think they really got it right. People can play online with their friends. They have a great experience. I think, online gameplay is not as big in Japan, obviously, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think Sony and Nintendo have been slower out of the chute. And you point out that the quality of the games is important. I agree. I think, but to some extent, having the multiplayer is to the quality of the games. I could play, embarrass myself, but Red Alert against the computer, I can beat it, even the highest level all the time. But once you play against other people, it's much more, I win half the time, I lose half the time. So I think they're on the right track.
I'm not denying Xbox Live is a great service. You'll see me on there every night playing against my friends. My point was that it's not going to be what ultimately decides the console war. It wasn't last generation, and it's not going to be this generation because Sony does have an online service, and it's free. My point was a lot of people prefer to free with smaller amount of features versus paying the amount every year to play with those features. Even right now, the Xbox 360, only 60 to 70% of its user base actually use Xbox Live. So even in the Xbox 360 community, not everybody is paying the $50 a year to play on Xbox Live.
Well, what about, I think the one that was absent, and someone did allude to it, but Nintendo, it has a fairly basic online offering, and maybe it's just the way that they view their box and their market, but what do you think about Nintendo and what they're doing?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Just with Nintendo, because you obviously have, the battle is Microsoft and Sony, but I think probably the surprise for a lot of people is how strong Nintendo is actually showing right now. We worked with most of the publishers. We used to, I remember just, in financing stuff, you look through the pipeline. When it started in the last transition, when it was GameCube, Xbox, and PS2, everybody was doing, they'd put out the game, they'd put it to one and port to the other two, whatever one it was, but it was definitely a three-platform, game. And about halfway through, people started dropping Nintendo, and it wasn't just a few. I mean, it was staggering, and we looked at that saying there's, it's all going to be first-party development. But I know last year at the last E3, a lot of excitement, and I would say kind of by old-timers, on just what Nintendo was doing and how it was something different. But obviously their community, it's quite frankly was the easiest for me to set up. PlayStation was the hardest, and Microsoft was kind of in between after crashing a few times. So what do you think? I mean, do you think they're going to expand on this, or is it just kind of this is what it's going to be?
I think Nintendo is smart in the fact that they let Microsoft and Sony for high graphics, high intensity gaming. And then Nintendo sort of sat back and said, hey, we're still a console, but we're going to go after the casual market, with no competition, by the way. So I think Nintendo's came out of the gate pretty strong. Will they be able to keep up the sales? That's left to be debated. A lot of people would say no. But they have a forthcoming online community that will be released fairly soon, which is left to be seen as well. But I think Nintendo is definitely a contender now. Electronic Arts has said that they're going to start making their catalog available for Nintendo Wii and start developing specifically for the Wii. So you've got one of the largest publisher out there saying, hey, this is a serious platform, we're going to start putting dollars to it. So Nintendo is definitely a contender. I don't foresee them being a high graphics contender. That's not what the Wii is built for.
I think that for Nintendo, the Wii, their new console, is more of a win or die situation, and they essentially bet the house on innovative gameplay with the new controller, and they are trying, and they can't even, and they also can't compete with the likes of Microsoft and Sony on the marketing dollars that will go into promoting the game console throughout its life cycle. And what we're trying to do is to win early and win a loyal crowd, and they do that through a variety of means. Gameplay that either you really like it or you really hate it, through games that appeal to a wider audience than what the Xbox and the PlayStation games appeal to, and also through a self-identification of the user with the gameplay. So they launched the Nintendo Me portal, which is about creating your avatar and being able to play games with your avatar inside the games and having your own sort of avatar page and profile and so on. And this is really about strengthening the affinity of the user with the Nintendo brand and with the Nintendo console, and allowing that very strong, very initial, strong winning of users to really take it further for them, because they will never be able to compete with Sony and Microsoft, and when they essentially, to a certain extent, in my opinion, bet the house on the console, and they are continue to doing and being innovative, trying to strengthen really strongly that affinity between the console and the user, something which the others are not doing that strong.
Maybe just a question for Darren, and I'd be curious. I mean, one of the things that, in talking to a lot of folks, I mean, I think there is a fundamental concern in the console industry that the costs are skyrocketing, but you're only going to charge consumers so much for a game, and we're at $60 now a game. One of the things that obviously are going to do, I think the console manufacturers are going to continue to invest in tools and other things to speed up time to delivery and also just try to reduce some of the costs around that. Clearly the other way, and Microsoft buying massive, but really trying to encourage this online gaming, online ad model. But I can tell you, if I spend $60 for a game and I get a bunch of ads throughout the game, I might be a little annoyed. Maybe Madden football, it's okay, but if it's on Splinter Cell, I watched the Bond movie, and it was just, it was so blatant, it was annoying to me, just in a movie theater, and I just don't know how it would be if that's a $10 ticket or a $15 ticket as opposed to a $60 game. Thoughts?
So game costs are rising, and that's inevitable. If you bought a game in the last couple of years, because of this next generation, it's expensive. Like as David mentioned before, $30 million for a AAA title. So there's different ways to monetize a game now, not just the price you pay at Best Buy or Walmart to purchase that game. One of the ways is in-game advertising. Is it the end-all and be-all? No, but it is one way that it's going to help the video game industry. There's also RMTs, or real money transactions. Yoav talked about this with purchasing virtual items or virtual goods. Those are all done in a sort of a virtual transaction. And there's some other alternative ways to monetize the video game as well. In terms of delivering ads within a game, are all games created equal? No. Are all advertisers want to be in every game? No. So there's some games fully contextually relevant for games, which are the sports games, the automotive games, any game that sort of takes place in a virtual world, a world in which that we would look at. Are games built in the 1700s or built around a fantasy land or an old castle? Probably no. You probably can never imagine seeing an iPod poster on the wall or an Apple computer on the side. That doesn't make much sense. And so it doesn't make sense for the advertiser, but most importantly, it doesn't make sense to the gamer. And that is the first and foremost thing here, is that if it makes sense for the gamer, the advertiser will have a better campaign. And if it makes sense for the advertiser and the gamers hate it, then it's going to be blogged about and talked about all over the net, and it's not going to transpire as a very good advertising campaign. So we sort of cherry pick the titles that we're bringing in within IGA to bring our advertisers into, but that also opens up an opportunity where around the game environment, as I alluded to earlier, you can deliver advertising campaigns. And those advertising campaigns then will trickle back into the publishers and developers and hopefully drive down the cost of that particular game. But if it doesn't drive down the cost of the game, they can then use those dollars that have gone straight to their EBITDA and fund new games or new other games out there.
Yeah, forgive me, but I question whether or not advertising in these $50, $60 games is really going to have a long-term or really significant impact. Just simply because you're spending this money, you don't want to see advertising in your games. And the reason why we're all able to get away with it at this point is because there really isn't a viable, free, high-quality alternative to it. Having something, and obviously I'm speaking about us, something that feels like television, something that is free, makes it much more difficult for the guys who are charging dollars, who are movies, essentially, to be able to put in product placements. And we know that there's going to be a limit to the amount of product placement that I'm going to see in a film that I paid $9 for. And so there's a level to it, but it ends up being incremental revenue. It doesn't really drive that part of the business. And then if you look at the second question, which is, will the costs of these high quality games go up or will they come down over time? I mean, I think it's very obvious that the cost of game development is going to continue to go up. You just have to, as a retail game publisher or as a console game, you always have to be delivering brand new experiences in enabling the consumer to see things that they'd never seen before. And it is, again, exactly like big budget motion pictures. Every year, it's got to be something new. I would certainly, if I'm going to see a Star Wars 10, I certainly expect it to be a lot better than Star Wars 4. And I think that that's all going to continue to drive up costs, particularly as we start to see other kinds of competition.
I want to just switch to the PC business for and it's interesting. I've always had a saying in tech, it's kind of everything moves in cycles, and the minute you think there aren't cycles, we're either at the top or the bottom. And I just remember in 2000 we were going through the transition and consoles were all the rage, and you could not, a good PC developer could not beg for money or give away their products. I mean, there was no interest from an investor perspective. It was a dying market. And I think the double whammy was with the internet meltdown, it also had this impact. So one, obviously, that meant it was probably a great time to be putting money to work, and I'm sure the folks that did made some good money. But the interesting thing, and someone alluded to this, with Microsoft and Sony, I think Nintendo, may be crazy like a fox on this because they make money on their boxes where Microsoft and Sony are hemorrhaging. And it's only, again, that's concern when you look at this, it's getting more expensive to make games, so the threshold for break even is much higher. It's no longer, hey, we'll sell a couple 100,000 units, we'll make our money, and it was worth the bet. You no longer can kind of do these gut checks, and that does take away from some of the innovation. I think from the console side, these boxes are only becoming more and more sophisticated, more expensive, and I think, to me, if anybody should be able to price something right, it's Sony, one of the largest consumer companies in the consumer electronics companies in the world, and the fact that they had the challenges they did in Japan, probably one of the most sophisticated consumer electronic markets in the world, just shows you how much pain they're actually taking on each box they're selling. So this actually goes into the next thing. Is this going to be the last round of PC and console? And maybe in years we'll be talking about panels and we'll be combining the two. I noticed Microsoft just made the announcement that Xbox will be rolled out in May, and you'll be able to interact PC to console. Is that news or a non-event, and what's the thoughts? And I'll start with you, Mike.
Okay, so on the first topic, is the PC game industry dying? I think everyone up here knows some of the statistics I'm going to cite, but maybe some people in the audience don't. No, absolutely not. It's some of the tracking agencies are notorious for not including some of the key revenue sources. They do box sales at retail. They don't include online subscription fees. World of Warcraft has 8 million users paying $15 a month in the Western world. So you're north of $500 million, closing in on $1 billion a year in revenue. That's not included in the PC game. You got Cartwriter, one of these games from Nexon in Korea, that's generated $100 million in revenue on these virtual item things. That's not included in the PC game statistics. You've got digital distribution, like Steam. Our estimate is they made $10 million alone through digital distribution of Half-Life 2, and that's not included in the NPD figures. So, the demise of the PC industry is way overblown. And the second question is on Microsoft's move from Xbox Live into PC. It certainly bears to be watched. I mean, one of their models is you have to pay on the Xbox side, and how does that translate on the PC world? You have to pay in the gold and silver models, and what do you get out of that? It's a tough road in the PC world because everyone is used to having a free service in the PC world, so we'll have to see what happens there.
Yeah, I think World of Warcraft has been sort of an anomaly, though. I mean, there really is no other PC game that could even come close to the numbers that they've put up. I think the issue with PC gaming is that it's not a standardized platform. While everyone has a PC and it's the most popular platform, not a lot of people understand how to install a brand new video card into their PC. Not a lot of people know how to put more RAM into their PC to make a game work. Came out. I think because you have that closed platform with the consoles, that's why the consoles have grown so popular. Not to mention that the technology with the consoles is completely caught up and in some ways even surpassed the PC. So the PC is really good for shooters, it's really good for strategy games and MMOs like World of Warcraft. But I really don't see or ever going to see the PC rise up and challenge the consoles ever again. I just don't see that it's feasible at this point.
I just sort of want to ask an open-ended question to anybody up here or anybody in the audience. 2 or 3 years, what's the difference between a PC and a console? Because the hardware is virtually the same thing.
The 360 basically is a PC at this point. I mean, the Xbox were PC parts off the shelf, just put into a case.
Xbox, the dev kits they were sending out were PCs, and it was an emulation. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, but I will tell you that the closed system, and if it ends up being the Xbox Live on the PC is Xbox Live, one of the problems with a closed system is that, as a developer, you have to go through Microsoft's approval process. They got to want you in. They have lots of risk to having that. There is an incentive for them to have less titles, in these things. You want to have enough titles, but not too many. In the PC world, you have many choices. So there's a lot of strength in what we've seen as being traditional PC, and certainly as these, because I would say that even things like the box that I got from Comcast last month is starting to look like a console and like a PC. I think that there's still many for that, this blending to open up new opportunities.
I think that if anything, the PC gaming model is actually winning. It's winning for several reasons. One is that I don't agree with Shannon's observation that the console is caught up with PC in terms of hardware. I think that maybe PS3 is better than the average PC today, but in terms of graphic processing and such. But in a year's time, the PC will surpass it by far. We'll have quad core in every house. We'll have GPUs that are far better than the GPU on the Sony device. I don't think that a closed environment such as a PS3 or an Xbox 360 can even compete with the PC in 2 or 3 years. So that's one thing. The second thing is that, as mentioned, the console road from a developer perspective is a toll road. So if you have a highway on the PC with a much larger install base, why should you go on the toll road where you have to pay a place Sony and Microsoft a very high fee for every unit that you ship into the market. And the third thing that we never mentioned on this panel is the fact that from an install base, a user base, PC gaming is by far larger than any number of consoles that were ever distributed. We don't count here the casual users, but if you look at where publishers are going, what Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo are trying to do, they're actually trying to shift away a bit from the core user and trying to shift to the casual user, because the install base and the free income there and the amount of spending that they spend both in terms of hours of gameplay, and hopefully we'll be able to convert that into revenues, whether advertising based or premium based, is by far more attractive than just sticking to the same old core audience and trying to sell them game after game after game, which at the end of the day, there's only a limited number of dollars that a typical core user allocate to this type of spending.
Right. What I want to do now, because I want to have a little time for a couple questions, why don't we just briefly move over to mobile? I think that's probably another platform that people talk about. It's still very early, but you know, when we do talk about gaming and communities and the interaction of, you know, the ability with the phone to really have a really immersive community. You know, do you think, and there are companies out there getting funded, and the question that I have is it a standalone business, or is it really, you know, better served just to be an add-on service to, you know, what's going on in the PC and console business? So I'd love to get your thoughts, maybe start with you.
I think it is a standalone business. Personally, we don't review mobile games on our website, even though we review games from every other platform that exists, basically. I mean, basically, the mobile market is for the ultimate casual player. They're the people who ride the train to work and have 10 minutes to play bowling, or want to go online with their mobile phone and play somebody in chess. It's a different type of market. It's a different type of person. And therefore, you have to tailor the games that you create to those people and to the handset. I mean, the handsets currently, you can't input 2 buttons at once and have it connect. It's basically you have 1 button on or off. It's binary. So that sort of limits the game design as far as what you can create for the system. Also, you have to create your games to make sure you can play them for 5 or 10 minutes and get something out of them and feel like they're rewarded. They don't have the 3 hours to sit down and get through 4 levels and really sort of get that instant gratification from the game. So it's a completely different perspective from design, distribution, and everything, and I think it's a completely different market as well.
Okay.
I was going to say that that if you look at mobile as not being, you know, a platform for games, but rather a place to extend your community, then there are all sorts of interesting opportunities for certainly going to be building mobile elements for our franchises.
Okay. Well, then it's interesting. I mean, and you have Glue, I think, out on the road right now. I do agree. I think that, you know, and part of what I was asking is just as a community expands, it seems natural, and technologies continue to evolve on the mobile side, and we're still very early. I mean, the quality of the games relative to what you get in other areas, you know, it's going to improve over the years. And I think one of the big mistakes that a lot of people say is, oh, I like mobile, you know, because you hear some of the kind of from the larger on the media side, we like this because you don't have to put a lot of money into the games. And I always say, you know, do you think it's going anywhere but up in a big way? Because it's going to, and I think that's certainly going to be something. Why don't we, just to wrap it up, maybe have each of you, as briefly as you can, just maybe say, you know, kind of what's the biggest challenge you've seen, you know, in your companies to date, and then I'll turn it over to a couple questions from the audience. Start.
When you talk about, you know, challenges within the company, I think that we could all make a list of the various things you're trying to do as a person who's operating a company. But so I'll just stick to the community and social aspects of it. There is this interesting conundrum. As games become more social, people become more engaged, and they're spending more time online. And for us, the more episodes that they download, of course, that increases our cost structure. It becomes more expensive for us to support these better users. And so to a certain degree, you know, we all need the ad market to catch up to where we are. That's really the best way to monetize these highly engaged users. And so, you know, getting our message out there that we do have a new ad medium, bringing that to the advertisers who can benefit from that is really a much bigger challenge for us than getting to consumers.
Great.
I think
Darren?
Keith nailed it when he said educating the advertising market. It's something that IGA set out 3 years ago. an entire year holding gaming 101s at ad agencies and at brands, literally spending an entire day explaining what video games really are, from Tech Mobile back in the day all the way up to today's Madden 2007. So in educating the world, it's not just your 17-year-old pimple popper teenager sitting in the back of the class wearing black and playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's not that anymore. It's actually the average age of a gamer is 29. Some people say 30. It's educating the market. Gamers really are. I think that's the number one obstacle that IGA faces. And once people can understand and can wrap their heads around who a gamer really is, I think the ad dollars will then follow.
Okay, Shane?
I think the biggest challenge for the industry right now is sort of breaking the stigma of the typical gamer, who is sort of like you said, the 17-year-old pimple popper, the guy who sits in his basement, the guy who's 35 and is still living with his parents. I think the Nintendo's Wii has really sort of started to break down those boundaries. For instance, my fiance just started playing video games for the first time ever. Thank you, God. Because of the Wii. I brought the Wii home. We had some people over. We had some drinks. We started playing tennis. Next thing you know, it turned into a Wii party. So, you know, while Nintendo has sort of gone against the grain, they're not trying to one-up people with technology. They don't really have a robust online user interface. It's all about sort of going back to the old school and bringing people together again in person to play video games. And I think that's sort of what really help in breaking down those boundaries and getting the mass market to accept gaming and sort of embrace it again like it did back in the 80s with the arcade scene.
So agree with all these comments. For us personally, our struggles are more along lines of dealing with a game publisher infrastructure. A lot of the publishers are sort of made up of 10 or 15 different developers that they sort of publish their work, and when we try to work with a single publisher, a lot of times we end up having to work with each developer, and it's hard because the developers disagree with corporate, or they do something different than the other developer that's all part of the same corporate does. So we spend a lot of time sort of struggling with those issues, and I guess that's just the nature of the industry.
I definitely agree with the advertising perspective and with having to educate the market about who is the gamer really. But another issue that we face is the vicious circle that exists between the stranglehold that retailers have on the market, the cost of developing a game, and the concentration into big publishers, which today actually limits the innovation, limits their publisher acceptance to really embark in new business models and to take risks. And from our perspective, it's really limiting the potential of expanding beyond the core audience.
All right, well, thank you very much. Maybe we have a few minutes. Maybe we can take just a question from the audience if anybody has any. Otherwise, we'll wrap this up. Any questions for the panel? All right, well, thank you for, oh. All right, well, good luck in traffic.
Dude, did you hear your glass, man?
Good.